The bar went silent when the woman burst through the door, her voice breaking as she begged for help. Her little boy was seizing in the back seat of a broken-down car. Everyone froze, drinks in hand, but one man stood up without hesitation. The same man they'd been mocking all night. The bar was alive that Friday night, loud and restless, with laughter spilling out like beer from an overfilled glass. Neon lights buzzed faintly above the rows of liquor bottles, casting a sickly glow across the polished wood counter. In the corner, where the noise dulled just enough to leave space for thought, sat Jack. His boots were heavy with grease stains, his denim jacket faintly smelling of motor oil and long days under the hood of cars. A single glass of whiskey rested before him, untouched for several minutes at a time, as though he were drinking more for the silence than the burn. At the next table, a group of men in tailored suits laughed too loudly at their own stories. Their ties hung loose, jackets draped over their chairs, and their words carried the careless confidence of men who had never been tired in the same way Jack was tired. One of them, cheeks flushed from drink, leaned back in his chair and nodded toward Jack. "Hey, careful not to get oil on the floor," he said with a smirk, lifting his glass as if to toast his own wit. The others burst into laughter, the kind that demanded attention, shallow and sharp. Jack let it wash over him without reaction. He had been in louder rooms with worse men. Insults, he knew, only had the power you gave them. He lifted his glass, sipped once, and set it back down with deliberate calm. Another man chimed in, voice thick with derision. "Mechanics don't belong in a place like this. What's next? Bringing in the janitors and dishwashers too." More laughter followed. One of them slapped the table hard, nearly tipping his beer. Jack's eyes flickered in their direction, but did not linger. He was thinking about Emily, 8 years old, at home asleep, the stuffed rabbit still tucked under her arm when he kissed her goodnight. This, he reminded himself, was not the fight he needed to pick. His battles were fought in daylight, over bills, over meals, over making sure his little girl never felt the absence of the mother who had left years before. But the taunts kept circling. "Tell me, grease monkey," one said, leaning closer now, his cologne sharp in the air. "What's it like fixing cars all day? Ever dream bigger? Or is that wrench your life partner?" The laughter swelled again, a chorus of mockery aimed squarely at the quiet man in the corner. Jack finally set his glass down with care, turning his head slightly. His face was unreadable, neither smiling nor scowling. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but it carried just enough weight to cut through the noise. "I'm not just a mechanic." For a moment, there was silence. Then the suits roared, slapping each other's backs, nearly spilling their drinks. One cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Oh yeah? What else are you, a superhero?" Another leaned forward, mock seriousness on his face. "Come on, tell us. Don't keep us in suspense." Jack only smiled faintly. Not the smile of a man beaten down, but the kind that comes from patience forged in harder places. His eyes softened, as though he was looking not at them but through them, to memories they could not begin to understand. He did not explain. Not yet. Some truths, he knew, only mattered when the time was right. The air in the bar was thick with noise, the kind of sound that dulls into a single blur after a while. Jack had already slipped back into silence, content to let the mocking fade into the background, when the door swung open with a rush of cold night air. A woman stumbled inside, her breath short, hair disheveled, eyes wide with panic. She looked to be in her early 30s, coat hastily thrown over a simple blouse, one shoe untied as if she had run. Her voice cracked the moment she crossed the threshold. "Is there a doctor here? Please, someone help." The bar froze. Cards were set down. Glasses paused midair. Even the jukebox seemed quieter for a heartbeat. She clutched the doorway, her chest heaving, and forced out the words between gasps. "My car broke down outside. My son, he's having a seizure in the back seat. Please, I need help." Her desperation rang through the room, sharp enough to cut through every layer of laughter and bravado. For a long moment, no one moved. The suited men who had mocked Jack earlier looked at each other, mouths slightly open, as if the sudden shift from bar games to real life had stolen their voices. One man muttered something about calling an ambulance, but his phone remained untouched on the table. Jack was already on his feet. The scrape of his chair against the floor was the only answer to the woman's plea. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions. He just said, "Show me." The woman's head snapped toward him, eyes brimming with relief. She hurried back out the door, and Jack followed, boots striking the floor in steady rhythm. Behind them, the bar's patrons drifted toward the door, curiosity pulling them outside. The men in suits exchanged uneasy glances before trailing after, their laughter finally gone. The night air hit hard and cold. Parked just beyond the glow of the bar sign was an aging sedan with its hazard lights blinking weakly. The woman sprinted to it, fumbling with the door handle, voice trembling as she called to her son inside. Jack's steps quickened. By the time she flung open the back door, he was already beside her. In the back seat, a young boy, no more than 7, lay convulsing, his small frame jerking violently, his face pale and lips tinged with blue. The mother's hands hovered helplessly over him. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jack slid into the car without hesitation, his movements calm, controlled, every muscle remembering an old rhythm. He didn't look panicked, not even for a second. "Ma'am," he said firmly but gently. "I need you to stay calm for him. He needs you steady." The crowd that had followed from the bar stood back in stunned silence, their breath misting in the night air. For the first time that evening, Jack wasn't the quiet man in the corner. He was the only man moving. Jack slid onto the back seat beside the boy with a steadiness that seemed almost unnatural in the middle of chaos. The boy's body was trembling violently, his breath short and ragged, and a faint gurgling sound rattled in his throat. "Easy now," Jack murmured, more to himself than anyone else, his voice low and calm, the kind of tone designed to anchor people when panic wanted to tear them apart. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered pouch. The zipper was worn, the canvas faded, but inside were tools of precision, things no ordinary mechanic carried. Latex gloves, a penlight, antiseptic swabs, airway aids. It was a kit built from a life that had required readiness every single day. The boy's mother stared, stunned. You carry that with you?" Jack didn't look up. His hands were already working, slipping on the gloves with a practiced ease. "Always," he said simply. "Breathe with me, ma'am. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Stay steady." The boy's convulsions made the car shake slightly. Jack gently turned him onto his side, clearing his airway with 2 swift movements that looked more like memory than conscious choice. He tilted the boy's head, keeping the passage open, checked his breathing, then shone the penlight briefly into his eyes. The boy gagged once, then drew in a sharper breath. Jack spoke softly as he worked, his tone both professional and human. "Come on, buddy. You're okay. You're safe. Stay with me now. That's it, breathe." Behind them, the small crowd from the bar stood frozen. The men in suits who had been so loud an hour ago now stood in silence, their smug smiles gone, replaced by wide eyes and uneasy frowns. One of them whispered, "Where the hell did he learn to do that?" But no one answered. The boy's breathing began to steady, the frantic jerks slowing until only a faint tremor remained in his small hands. Jack held him firmly but gently, checking his pulse with one hand while the other steadied the boy's shoulder. The mother sobbed with relief, clutching Jack's arm as if he were the only solid thing in the world. "Oh God, oh thank you. How did you know what to do?" Jack finally looked up at her. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something older, heavier, as though they had seen far too much to ever forget. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he checked the boy once more, then nodded toward the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. "Because," he said quietly, "I've done this before." The flashing red lights of the ambulance painted the night in sharp, pulsing color. Paramedics rushed over, their voices clipped and efficient, carrying equipment as they moved toward the sedan. Jack shifted aside just enough to give them room, but stayed near the boy until the professionals took over. One medic, tall and brisk, glanced at Jack's work and paused for a fraction of a second. "Airways clear. Stabilized breathing. Vitals are steady." The medic muttered, then looked at Jack. "Who prepped him?" Jack simply nodded once. The medic gave him a look of recognition, one professional acknowledging another, and then returned to the boy. The mother clung to her son's small hand, tears streaming down her face, whispering thanks under her breath. Every so often, her gaze flicked toward Jack, searching his face for answers. The men from the bar, who had mocked him so confidently inside only minutes earlier, stood behind the crowd now with guilty expressions. One of them shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his loosened tie as though it were strangling him. Another cleared his throat, started to speak, then stopped, shame pressing his words back down. Finally, the mother broke the silence. Her voice shook as she asked, How did you know what to do? You saved him before anyone else even moved." Jack exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. For a moment, he considered saying nothing at all, letting the night close over this moment like water over a stone. But he saw the fear still etched on the woman's face and knew she needed an answer. He met her eyes, steady and calm. "Before I was a mechanic," he said quietly, his voice carrying further than he expected, "I was an army combat medic. I fixed more than engines. I saved lives." The words settled heavily on the crowd. The murmurs began, soft, regretful whispers from the bar patrons. The suited men looked at each other, their earlier arrogance stripped bare. The man who had mocked him most loudly dropped his gaze to the pavement, shame coloring his face redder than any whiskey had. Then, from the back of the group, a new figure stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence carried weight even before anyone recognized him. It was Richard Hale, the CEO who owned half the businesses in town. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he approached, his expression neither mocking nor surprised, but thoughtful. He extended his hand toward Jack. "We could use men like you," Hale said, his voice calm but commanding. "Not for your hands, for your heart. Come see me Monday morning. My company has a place for someone who knows what it means to serve." The crowd shifted, eyes widening. Respect rippled through them, not just for Jack's skills, but for the quiet dignity he carried. Jack hesitated only briefly before shaking Hale's hand. His grip was firm, but his gaze drifted back to the boy, now stable in the paramedic's care, his mother's tears of relief wetting her cheeks. That was the reward that mattered to him. Behind them, the men who had laughed at him earlier shuffled awkwardly. Then, almost in unison, one of them called out toward the bar, "His next drink's on us." This time, there was no sneer, no mockery, only respect. Later that night, long after the bar had quieted and the ambulance had disappeared into the distance, Jack stood in the doorway of his small, modest home. The air inside smelled faintly of laundry soap and the lingering sweetness of the hot chocolate he'd made for Emily before tucking her in. He hung his jacket by the door, heavy with the memory of the evening, and walked softly down the narrow hallway to his daughter's room. Emily stirred as he pushed the door open, the soft glow of a night light casting her small frame in golden hues. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under one arm, its ears worn from years of love. Jack leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, the way he always did, the ritual that never changed no matter how hard the day had been. Her eyes fluttered open, sleepy but curious. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice small. Jack pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. "I didn't mean to wake you, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Emily's eyes searched his face, sensing something beneath his calm exterior. Children, Jack often thought, had a way of seeing through layers adults never noticed. "Daddy," she asked softly, "why do people laugh at you?" The question hit him with more weight than the jeers at the bar ever had. He sat on the edge of her bed, running a hand slowly over his stubbled chin, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want bitterness to touch her, didn't want the cruelty of strangers to take root in her young heart. "Sometimes, Emily," he said at last, his voice steady but tender, "people only see what's on the surface. They look at my boots, my hands, the grease from work, and they think that's all there is. They don't see the whole story." She frowned slightly, her small fingers tightening on the stuffed rabbit. "But you're more than that." Jack smiled, a tired but genuine curve of his lips. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "That's right. But the truth is, sweetheart, we don't need everyone to understand. The people who matter, the ones who love us, who stand with us, they see us for who we really are. And that's enough." Emily's frown softened. She nodded sleepily, her faith in him unshaken, her little body relaxing again beneath the blanket. "Okay, Daddy." He kissed her forehead once more. "Good night, Emily." As she drifted back into dreams, Jack lingered a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. For the first time in a long while, he felt a deep, quiet peace settle over him. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a father, a healer, and a man who had refused to let others define his worth. When he finally turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, a faint smile touched his face. He knew the truth. Sometimes the strongest people in the room were the quietest, the ones with scars no one could see and stories no one knew, until the moment life called on them to rise.